morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about hyperconverged infrastructure. When I started thinking about what I would talk to you about today, I want to actually go back a little bit and say, why is this such a big deal and what's driving it? And we all hear this concept of the shift to digital business or digital transformation, but what is it really like, day to day? What does it affect companies at a very real level? And we work with a lot of companies. VMware is a big enterprise, our customer base is a large enterprise customer base. So we work across enterprises across the world. And many of them are not IT companies. They're companies who, they're bank, they're retail, they're dairy companies, there's a wide variety of different companies. And they're all experiencing this idea of this shift to digital business or digital transformation. And the effect of that means that these companies, how they interact with their customers is fundamentally changing. A new type of interface, a new type of customer intimacy, which is driven by mobile, digital transformation, and cloud. And what's interesting about this is the effect that that has on their IT organization. Their IT organization no longer has the opportunity to merely focus on building some back-end process for payroll or how do we handle accounts receivables, that sort of things. They are now central to how the company interacts with its customers. They're a key part of making the company successful, and they're a key part of the competitiveness of the company. And that means how IT works fundamentally changes. They no longer get to focus on dealing with a sense of an out-of-control data center. I need to worry about DR, I need to worry about all those things. Of course they do. But they have a whole new set of worries that comes to bear. And that new set of worries is around, how do I make my developers successful? How do I end up driving into these new type of technologies which are highly distributed? How do I worry about mobile? I've got a whole bunch of my customers coming at me from a mobile point of view. And they must attack this problem in a highly flexible fashion. And as Diane pointed out, a lot of them are saying, let's try and use the cloud. A lot of them are equally saying, I need to have a bit more control than that. I have concerns about security, and I have concerns about my ability to drive particular policies. I mean policies in terms of network connectivity, access, and performance. So what they're doing is they're taking a different approach. And a different approach, sometimes I use the word hyperscale envy. They're basically saying, I want the same type of environment that the hyperscale providers can bring to bear, but I don't have hundreds of engineers to develop custom solutions. I'm not in a position to say I can throw millions of dollars of research at something to give me a better control plane in this space. So instead, what they want to do is leverage technologies that give them that same capability, but without having to do that level of investment. And in many cases, this comes down to 2 or 3 key things. One of the key things is a software-defined approach. How am I going to look at this in a much more flexible fashion, which says I can really look at the provisioning, the management of my data center infrastructure and the apps using a flexible software approach. The other question that they look at is say, and how am I going to build the right type of infrastructure to underlie all this? And that's where HCI comes in, because it's unique in its ability to give those enterprises and those IT organizations the benefits of some of the big hyperscale research and what the hyperscale people can do, but getting it in a way where they can consume it, they can absorb it, and people like QCT and the HCI vendors have done the hard work of making sure this thing is integrated together, and this is supported by a single organization, and things like telemetry, things like how do I support this from a visibility into what's going on point of view is all integrated and taken care of already. So I emphasize this as a software-defined approach. I come from a software company, so I focus on what does the software fit into the story do, and how does that fit into hyperconverged infrastructure. So what they're obviously looking for is, I want high performance. Who doesn't? Of course they want performance, and they want to be able to get the best possible speed they can get out of their infrastructure, speed and cost obviously, so they focus on things like low cost. But one of the 2 of the key things that they also focus on is they want simple. I want to be able to say, I don't want to have different versions of this for every app that I have, if at all possible. So they look for infrastructure which allows them to support multiple apps. And at the back of their mind, every company wants to be the next big giant company. How do I scale? How am I going to deal with the new set of customers that I'm going to get now that I'm suitably digitally transformed? And I want to be able to do that without having to think through, I'm going to have to re-architect everything every time I try and scale a little bit more. I've emphasized that this is this software-defined approach. And so infrastructure in some way has evolved into software. That's kind of a stupid thing to say in some ways. Obviously, your code needs to run somewhere. But the way that the IT organization and the way that the DevOps teams begin to think of that infrastructure is very software-driven. They speak of things like, I am running a storage service. I am leveraging software-defined networking. I am trying to build up my compute infrastructure in ways which bring together containers and microservices. Software concepts brought across all of this. And what hyperconverged does, it brings the underlying infrastructure to be truly able to deliver on this concept. So, this is a VMware view of how we do this, which is, we use the term SDDC, the Software Defined Data Center, and we're going to hear a new term called VMware Cloud Foundation, which is something that we're working with QCT on in terms of how we pull that in a hyperconverged space. But broadly speaking, you tend to see the following things. I end up with compute virtualization, I end up with some form of software or storage virtualization, and very much coming to the fore, at least from our point of view, is network virtualization. And that's partially driven by the fact that as you build out this new type of infrastructure, connectivity, the ability to move workloads quickly, the ability to be able to secure in a very dynamic environment, networking cuts to the core of that. And that's one of the things why we have such a focus on network virtualization. And this block across the bottom, you've got management layers on top. This block across the bottom is essentially the essence of what hyper-converged infrastructure is. Obviously, you need to connect it to a piece of hardware, but you got the same concepts rippling through. These three things brought together and managed in a unified fashion. I'm going to skip some slides here in a few seconds, but I just want to talk about one or two of these. So we speak of this concept of hyper-converged software, and this is where you get into an interesting challenge with respect to names. You've got converged infrastructure, hyper-converged infrastructure, hyper-converged infrastructure appliances. Broadly speaking, I'm using the word hyper-converged software to capture the concept of the components of storage, the components of compute, and the components of networking being brought together managed in a cohesive fashion from a software point of view. And then taking those things, working with hyper-converged infrastructure vendors to bring this together in a way that says you can essentially roll this into your data center and you get the nice management software layer and you get the reliability and you get the supportability and the stability of that underlying hyper-converged hardware. So you need to bring both of these two things together. And what's the effect of some of this? So we've been doing, we've been doing hyper-converged infrastructure for quite a while, not always based on singular appliances, sometimes by getting customers to build their own infrastructure, and we give them the software to do this. And the focus has been heavily on compute and storage. And that's what most people today, when they think of hyper-converged infrastructure, they leap to compute and storage. As I've mentioned earlier though, our argument is, and where we see the next big change in this space, is to bring networking into the mix. And that really cuts to this core because of the fact, one, as I mentioned, connectivity, but also when you begin bringing public cloud into the mix, now I want to be able to take those same applications, manage them on my converged infrastructure on-prem, but I want to be able to take those same applications and connect them and manage them in the cloud as well. Connectivity, networking security, how I manage networking is going to be key to all of that. And so this is where we see the next major trend. So what we've done, again working with QCT, is, I'm going to skip some slides here, sorry. This concept of the VMware Cloud Foundation. And what this essentially is take those three key components of hyper-converged infrastructure and package them together using some management software around it as well, which essentially says, I'm just going to manage this as a unified block of infrastructure. You don't necessarily see an update to your networking stack if you need to change it. You don't necessarily see a new version of your virtual SAN or whatever storage technology you're using. Instead, you look at this as a unified piece of software and hardware which deliver the compute infrastructure you need to run a private cloud. And we refer to this as a foundational layer. Note that there's lots of other layers in the mix. You got to worry about management, you got to worry about telemetry, you got to worry about the actual application layers themselves. But we see this emerging very standardized approach, hyper-converged approach to the underlying foundation layer itself. And this applies to both private cloud and to public cloud. The same software can run in both of these instances, which gives you the same interfaces, the same APIs in both of these instances. So what are we doing with QCT on this? First of all, our relation with QCT when we started building our VMware Cloud Foundation products, QCT was one of the first companies that we were interacting with in terms of building this from a hyper-converged point of view. And you know, solution centers like this, some of the solution centers worldwide, give our customers and give you an opportunity to look at this, this infrastructure and see how it executes in a really great hyper-converged story from both VMware and QCT. The products, as Mike mentioned already, some of those are out there and available, proof of concept. Several customers are using them at this stage. This has been a great relationship between the two companies, and I hope it continues to be. We're very much looking forward to continue to work with QCT in this space. And that's all I have. Thank you.